There is a sound baked into the memory of almost anyone who grew up watching television. A joke lands. And then, right on cue, a wave of laughter rolls in from somewhere just off camera. Dozens of voices, chuckling in perfect unison, filling the silence before the next line. For nearly 70 years, that sound was the heartbeat of American comedy. It told you when to laugh, how hard to laugh, and even whether a joke was funny at all. And then, one day, it just wasn't there anymore. Somewhere between the 1990s and today, an entire generation of hit comedies simply stopped using it. No audience, no canned chuckles, just silence after the punchline. And somehow, the shows got funnier. So what happened? Why did an industry built on manufactured laughter walk away from the very tool that made it rich? And here's the part almost nobody knows. The laugh track wasn't really an audience at all. It was one man, one very secretive, very strange man, who kept a locked machine in his garage that most of Hollywood was never allowed to see. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just why the laugh track disappeared, but why science says it was working on your brain the entire time, whether you wanted it to or not. Let's start at the beginning. Long before television, comedy already had a rule. People laugh better in groups. Vaudeville performers knew it. Radio comedians knew it. When you hear someone else laugh, something in your brain nudges you to laugh along, even if you're sitting alone in the dark. Early radio producers leaned into this instinctively, layering in the sound of a crowd to make a joke land harder. So when television arrived in the late 1940s, it inherited that assumption. Comedy needed an audience. The problem was, audiences are unpredictable, and that unpredictability was about to create an entire industry. Enter Charles Douglas. A sound engineer working for CBS, Douglas had spent the war years helping the Navy develop radar systems, which meant he understood machines, timing, and precision better than almost anyone in the entertainment business. When he moved into television production, he noticed something that bothered him deeply. Live studio audiences didn't laugh the way producers wanted. Sometimes a joke landed and got silence. Sometimes a mediocre line got a roar. Sometimes people laughed for so long it ruined the pacing of the next scene. So Douglas built a fix. Using laughter recordings, many of them pulled from the silent pantomime segments of a variety show, he began stitching together a library of human reactions. Chuckles, gasps, applause, groans. He built a machine to house it all, a strange contraption that looked something like a cross between a filing cabinet and a church organ, with rows of tape loops and keys that could trigger a laugh on command. It stood over 2 feet tall, and Douglas named it the Audience Response Duplicator. Nobody called it that. Everybody called it the laugh box. Here's where the story gets almost unbelievable. Douglas treated the laugh box like a state secret. It was kept under padlock. He wheeled it into editing rooms himself and insisted on working alone, refusing to let producers or engineers watch him operate it. Only his own family ever learned how the internal mechanism actually worked. For decades, television insiders referred to him as the industry's most talked about man, precisely because almost nobody had actually seen what he did. One television critic in 1966 nicknamed him the Hollywood Sphinx. And what he was doing quietly, from inside that locked box, was deciding how America laughed. By the early 1960s, the technique had a name: sweetening. If a joke bombed with the real studio audience, Douglas simply added laughter in post-production. If the audience laughed too hard or too long, he trimmed it down. Entire shows filmed without any audience at all could be given a completely fabricated laugh track from scratch. Shows like Bewitched, The Munsters, and the Beverly Hillbillies leaned hard into big, raucous Douglas laughter. Quieter shows like The Andy Griffith Show used a gentler touch. Either way, the laughter you heard almost never came from the people who were actually in the room. And here's a detail that tends to stop people in their tracks. Within the Douglas operation, different family members had different comedic sensibilities. Charlie himself was famously conservative, holding back on bigger laughs. His son Bob was known to be more liberal, more willing to let a scene roar, so producers would sometimes specifically request which Douglas they wanted working on their show that week, because the audience reacting to their jokes would genuinely sound different depending on which family member was at the controls. Think about that for a second. For 20 years, a huge percentage of American sitcom laughter was being curated by the personal taste of one family, working in secret, essentially auditioning as the entire national audience. There's a story from the era that captures just how normalized this had become. Comedian Milton Berle was reportedly watching one of his own post-production sessions when Douglas slipped in an extra laugh after a joke that hadn't quite landed live. Berle turned to the room and said, essentially, "See, I told you it was funny." Nobody in that room seemed bothered that the laughter hadn't actually happened. That was the business now. Performers weren't just being helped by canned laughter anymore. Some of them had started believing it. Even shows that started out with real audience reactions sometimes ended up quietly switching over. The Monkees, of all things, dropped its laugh track partway through its second and final season, and longtime viewers have noted that the episodes without it feel almost like an entirely different show, sharper in some ways, stranger in others, but undeniably changed by the absence of that constant, comforting hum of approval. Because the laugh box was patented and hand-built, Douglas effectively held a monopoly. If you wanted canned laughter in your show, you needed him. That monopoly lasted for decades, stretching from I Love Lucy all the way through Cheers, one of the last major holdouts of the classic laugh track era. But monopolies eventually crack, and so did this one. As technology modernized, competitors emerged with their own recording techniques, including protégés who had trained under Douglas himself and eventually built rival systems using stereo sound. The laugh track slowly stopped being one man's secret and became an industry-standard technique, something any studio could produce. Which meant the real question was no longer who could make a laugh track, it was whether anyone still wanted one. So why did the laugh track dominate for so long in the first place? Because, uncomfortable as it sounds, it works. This isn't just a story about nostalgia or old-fashioned taste. There's actual neuroscience behind why that sound is so persuasive. In 2019, a team of researchers at University College London, led by cognitive neuroscientist Sophie Scott, ran an experiment specifically designed to test this. They gathered 40 deliberately bad jokes. The kind of groan-worthy dad jokes that make you roll your eyes rather than laugh out loud. Jokes were played for participants either in silence with fake laughter added afterward, or with genuine spontaneous laughter added afterward. Then people rated how funny each joke actually was. The results were strikingly consistent. Adding any laughter at all made the exact same joke rated as funnier. Genuine spontaneous laughter boosted the rating even more than the fake version, but even obviously canned laughter still worked. According to Scott's team, a spontaneous laugh track could make a joke feel roughly 10 to 15% funnier, purely because of the social cue attached to it, with no change to the joke itself. Here's the detail that made headlines. The study also included adults with autism, since prior research suggested laughter might be processed differently in that population. The effect held up across both groups. Everyone, regardless of neurotype, was susceptible to the same trick. Hearing someone else laugh doesn't just signal that something is funny. It appears to genuinely shift how funny our brains perceive it to be, almost against our will. So if the science says laugh tracks work, why did television abandon them? The answer starts, oddly enough, with cameras. In the earliest days of sitcoms, most shows used a technique called single camera filming, shooting each scene multiple times from different angles, much like a movie. Then, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz changed the game with I Love Lucy, popularizing multi-camera filming in front of a live studio audience where several cameras captured a scene simultaneously as real people watched and reacted in the room. This format thrived for decades. It gave us the reaction shot, the perfectly timed pause, and eventually shows like Cheers, Seinfeld, and Friends, all filmed in front of real crowds, sometimes gently sweetened, but built around the presence of an actual audience. Then, starting quietly in the 1990s, a different kind of show began sneaking onto television. HBO's Dream On and The Larry Sanders Show experimented with single-camera comedy that skipped the studio audience entirely. And in the early 2000s, one show in particular changed everything. Malcolm in the Middle premiered in 2000, shot entirely single-camera, entirely without a laugh track, with the main character frequently breaking the fourth wall to talk directly to viewers. It was a massive hit. Alongside the British sitcom Spaced, it's often credited as the show that proved, definitively, that a sitcom did not need canned laughter to succeed. Scrubs followed a similar path not long after. Then came the format that arguably delivered the final blow, the mockumentary. When The Office premiered in the UK, and later its American adaptation, the entire premise depended on the illusion that a documentary crew was quietly filming real events in a real workplace. A laugh track would have shattered that illusion instantly. You cannot have canned audience laughter in a show pretending nobody knows the cameras are there. Parks and Recreation followed the same rulebook, so did Modern Family. The format itself made the laugh track structurally impossible. Around the same time, an entirely different comedic sensibility was rising. Cringe comedy. Shows built around discomfort, awkward silences, and jokes that were funnier specifically because nobody was laughing at them. Arrested Development, 30 Rock, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. These shows used hard cuts, dead air, and uncomfortable pauses as punchlines in themselves. Adding a laugh track to a moment engineered to feel awkward would have completely undercut the joke. And once critics and audiences started noticing something else, the laugh track's reputation never really recovered. People began pulling up old sitcom clips online with the laugh track stripped out entirely. And what they found unsettled a lot of viewers. Suddenly, characters seemed to be pausing for no reason, staring blankly at each other, waiting for laughter that would never come. Jokes that once felt sharp suddenly felt hollow, or worse, oddly mean-spirited. Since the canned laughter had been doing a lot of quiet work smoothing over jokes that weren't actually landing on their own, watching those stripped-down clips felt almost like catching a magician mid-trick. That exposure mattered. Once audiences understood that the laughter they'd been hearing for decades was, in many cases, entirely manufactured by one family working in a locked garage, the format started to feel less like a comforting tradition and more like a cheap shortcut, a crutch for jokes that couldn't stand on their own. By the 2010s, the shift was unmistakable. Prestige comedy had become almost synonymous with the absence of a laugh track. Silicon Valley, Fleabag, Atlanta, Succession if you want to stretch the definition of comedy at all. These shows didn't just skip canned laughter. They were built around the assumption that the audience could recognize what was funny entirely on their own without being told. There's one particular ending point that a lot of television historians point to as symbolic. The Big Bang Theory, filmed in front of a real studio audience with additional sweetening, ran until 2019 as one of the most watched comedies on the planet. Its finale is often described as the last major flagship sitcom to lean fully into the traditional laugh track format at that scale. When it ended, it felt less like just another show wrapping up and more like the closing of an entire era of television. But here's the twist. The laugh track never actually died completely, and understanding why reveals something surprisingly human about why we watch comedy in the first place. Multi-camera sitcoms with live audiences didn't disappear. Shows continued to be produced this way, sometimes drawing criticism for feeling dated, and sometimes finding surprisingly devoted audiences who genuinely prefer that format. Even sequel shows built for a streaming first, single-camera generations sometimes went right back to canned laughter anyway, almost defiantly, as if betting that the format still had one more comeback left in it. There's a reason for that stubborn survival, and it isn't just nostalgia. Watching comedy alone, on a phone or laptop, in total silence, can feel strangely isolating. A laugh track, fake as it may be, gives viewers the sensation of laughing along with other people rather than sitting in a room by themselves. Some writers have described this as an antidote to loneliness, a phantom audience standing in for the community that used to gather around a single living room television set. So the laugh track's decline was never purely about quality, or purely about audiences getting smarter. It was about comedy changing its relationship to the viewer. Old school laugh track sitcoms told you exactly when to laugh, almost like a friend nudging your shoulder at the right moment. Modern single camera comedy trusts you to find the joke yourself, in the silence, in the pause, in the exact moment nobody tells you it's supposed to be funny. Which brings us back to that locked box in Charlie Douglas's garage. For most of the 20th century, one secretive engineer's private sense of humor was quietly deciding what counted as funny for millions of households at once. Decades later, an entire generation of comedy writers built their careers on rejecting exactly that idea, betting that audiences didn't need to be told what was funny at all. Both approaches worked, for a while. Science says the fake laughter genuinely fooled our brains, and the silence that replaced it forced comedy to get sharper, tighter, and more honest, because there was nowhere left to hide a weak joke. So the next time you're watching an old sitcom rerun and that unmistakable wave of laughter rolls in right after a punchline, you'll know exactly what you're hearing. Not a studio audience, not even necessarily real laughter at all. In many cases, you're hearing the private sense of humor of one man, recorded decades ago, quietly deciding, on your behalf, that something was worth laughing at. And somewhere out there, buried in an archive, the actual laugh box still exists. A padlocked wooden cabinet that once controlled how an entire nation laughed. Sitting silent now, in a television landscape that finally decided it didn't need permission to find something funny, to find